Back to Wickerson Studios. I'm continuing with this kind of jazz plugin and trying to find out, well, practice as much as I can C# in the Visual Studio to produce custom nodes. And I'm just doing very basic things, and this is a nice example for people that want to get started with this. In the past video, I showed the series and range node, and I provide that on my GitHub, which is basically a nice node that produces from domain starts, domain ends, or start, stop, and steps and count, and how you can have a related, a nice relation to your range in your series component if you want to do that. And then this one over here I call add minus and multiply by self. And it's basically that incremental node that you could bring in and you don't have to type the plus, the -1, the multiplication by self. I didn't do division because it would just give you one anyhow. And I'll show you the basic scripts for writing this one. I haven't made an icon for it. It wouldn't be too hard. It would just be the plus, minus, and multiplication symbols. And then with that node, I'll be able to basically have access to all that data in one node without having to make it. So in jazzing things up, I'm just trying to make things more convenient and learn C# in the process. So Visual Studio over here, what I have is a solution here, folder that I call Wickerson Studios Jazz. So we don't need to get into properties where I'm hiding in the resources my icons. Complex types I have here, D is basic operators, and then list basics are things that's starting to use inputs and outputs as lists. And I will be going into data trees probably this weekend as well. So I'm very excited about this. So one thing I do is just kind of use past files to make sure that everything's right on track. But I'm using this method of writing in some ASCII text from Jose Luis at Parametric Camp. I really like that idea, so I know what these scripts are when I kind of jump into them. As I jump into here, you can see, this is basic operations and stuff like that. But it's pretty simple as you get your head through it. And these can be templates to really learn from. You want to set up, obviously, the names of your functions. Let's go back into the plus minus add list function. I call it add minus multiply by self, and that's add minus multiply. I increment list by values, Wickerson Studio C# programming, and then this is going to come up in the tab list basics. And then you have to put in your inputs, and my inputs are coming in as a list. So that's a nice example of that. And then my outputs are going out as list as well. And really, you're just naming it, my small name, and then a description of what it does. And then going into the algorithm, you're not going to be making variables to get started on your C script. You've got to make empty lists to get started. And you do have to remember how to fetch your inputs. And I like that term, fetch inputs. Data access, and then you want to get data lists, not just get data. And sometimes you have to reference those things, sometimes not. And I'm kind of figuring out when that's necessary or not. I make it a habit trying to put it in there whatever I can. And then the algorithm is to create 3 new lists, which are addition out, subtraction out, and multiply self. And then it's just a for each loop of each item in X, which will be the list that we created at the start. You're going to output that item plus 1, the item minus 1, and that item times itself. And then make sure you do your data access for setting your data lists. You have to remember not setting data, and you need to know 0, 1, 2, which are really the parameter numbers coming in. I can't really show you coming in here because 0 is the only one input, but as a reference to what you're doing, you want your first one to be reference 0, second one 1, third one 2, and then you're done. Unless you want to add a bitmap down here and make sure it's in your resources and follow through. So if I went into my series node, you'll see down here at the bottom in the bitmap, I've gone in and I've after the algorithm that I've written for both of them. The one thing I'm trying to make a habit of doing now is writing a general algorithm, and then after the algorithm, calling functions, create range and create series. So I'm realizing the basics of when I start having these get a little more complex, I'll be able to call functions within the solution, which is pretty nice within the scope of what can be called. So that's really a habit. And then the bit icon here is pretty nice. I just get, you can downsize this by just taking properties through range. I've learned up here right after the icon by a quick, I believe, symbol like this, that it can go right to properties, resources, series, and icons. But I'm not going to use that. I'm going to leave it to its long form with its notes for a while until I become more accustomed to that. So that's a nice example of that. That's the -1. As soon as you're done, you just want to test and build your solution. I won't be able to rebuild if Rhino's already open, so I'm not going to bother doing that because I just want to jump back over to my script, and there it is. You can see how everything works. It takes the range numbers and spits them right back out as an increment by 1, minusing by 1, and multiplying by self. And then I did the same with the series data. So just trying to make working Grasshopper and working with the data a little easier for people, and producing nodes so you don't have to spend your time kind of putting together in the maths. Once you have those basic skills, you might want to move into a little more advanced or intermediate development in C# and see what happens. So you can see this whole script's coming out. We're playing with list inputs and outputs in these nodes, and then I'm going to move into tree inputs and outputs. What I've done to get started is just some basic item inputs and outputs up here. So these scripts are available on GitHub, and I hope people find them helpful. Because if they don't find you handsome, they should at least find you handy.